Hello YouTube community, my name is the Jackhammer13, and today we're going to be doing a Mike-ochondriac podcast. So, first things first, I just want to say that it's been a while since we've done one of these things. It's been roughly 3 years, I want to say, 2016 I think was the last one. And these kinds of things are typically like my way of expressing myself to you guys about one, things that are happening with the channel, and two, things that are happening just in my overall life. However, I've done enough updates in my day to realize that channel updates aren't really what I enjoy doing. I only do them to let you guys know about the channel, and since for the most part a lot of people don't seem to really mind too much that I don't give an update every single time I come back and do something, I think I'm just going to kind of keep those to a minimum from now on. What instead I wanted to do was talk to you guys about me, about who I am as a person, about things that are going on in my life. A lot of people seem to really respond well to these kinds of videos. I was going back through them, and kind of at the request of a lot of my friends who had enjoyed that style of commentary. And kind of looking through all that, it seemed like it got pretty decent reception. A lot of people seem to like it, a lot of people seem to watch it. And for the most part, it's something that I think I would love to do more of. Today, we have quite a lot to talk about. It has been, as I said, a long time. And I kind of want to just go through some of the things that I touched on in those other videos that I never really gave some full closure to. And I also want to talk about some of the things that have either prevented me from doing stuff with the channel, prevented me from being the best person that I want to be, or have been common occurrences that have come up through those videos that I'm now sort of realizing are, innate flaws in myself. We're going to just bitch and complain about all that kind of stuff. So, like I said, strap yourself in. We got a long one for you. First things first, I want to talk about what happened in the first Mike-ochondriac podcast. I talked a little bit about a situation that had been developing at that point in time where I was talking with a friend who was female, and we sort of had this weird connection thing in my mind of like, well, will we, won't we date kind of thing. Almost immediately after releasing that video, I then released a response video to it, the Mike-ochondriac podcast, the first one. And with that, I basically had this morose attitude about everything. Everything was like, well, I kind of fucked up, and, this shit is not going the way that I thought it would go, and that kind of thing. And that notices, me noticing that when watching back through those videos is something that I want to touch on in a second. But then, a couple days, 3-4 days, maybe a week, something like that, after the fact, I released another version. The Mike-ochondriac podcast, and in that I was all peppy, cheery, fun, happy-go-lucky kind of person. And I was like, you know what, I don't gotta worry about that shit no more. It's all good, we've sorted it out, we've talked about it, and that kind of stuff. Everything's gonna be okay. I wasn't necessarily wrong with that sentiment. Everything ended up being okay. She and I remain friends, and one of the great things about that is that we are still friends to this day. We talk every now and again. College kind of makes things difficult for a lot of people in order to keep up appearances or whatever the fuck of some sort of relationship, friendship thing. But aside from that, anytime that we talk, things are on good terms. I might have mentioned this before, but since then, I've actually had a few girlfriends, I've had a few relationships, and I've had a few attempts at relationships. Of those, pretty much only one of them worked out to a point where the person and I, after breaking up, remained friends. And there's also this weird semi-relationship that I was in that wasn't necessarily like she and I considered ourselves boyfriend and girlfriend, because we weren't really doing stuff for that long before we eventually decided, yeah, it's best that we just remain friends. And she and I are also a very good friend. She comes over and talks with me a lot. I go and take her for drives and shit. Honestly, one of my best friendships currently going, that I do a lot of stuff with, came from that relationship. Not necessarily a dating one, per se, but one that was in essence us wanting to try it out and see if it would work. And what I noticed in the two of those 3 or 4 relationships that didn't work, what I noticed happened there was that I got over obsessive. I got to the point where every little mistake that I make, I'd beat myself up about. I'd constantly be in a depressed funk, and it'd be a lot of shit that honestly just isn't fun to be around. Now, these things weren't brought about because, of me overthinking something. Typically, those things were brought about by me, seeing my partner, my relationship buddy person thing, in a state where the relationship wasn't working for them, and I wanted to talk with them about this kind of stuff, and either they didn't have the ability to express in words what they were feeling, or they just didn't want to talk about it. That's probably likely due to a variety of factors, some having to do with me, some having nothing to do with me, some having to do with them, yada yada. You know how shit works in the real world. However, my responses to those is typically what led to them not wanting to talk with me anymore, or them not talking with me anymore, regardless of if they want to or not. Either because they feel like it would just be better that way, or whatever the fuck. And as time's gone on, I've sort of stopped worrying about those interactions with those people. But the same pitfalls and same problems come about each and every time that I try to have a relationship. Recently I've had somebody that I've been talking with and pining after for probably about 6 months. And within that period of time, I've had other, crushes or romantic advances onto people, and, none of them have necessarily panned out the way that I've wanted them to. None of them have necessarily been, super negative, and I ended up, reading the situation wrong. It's just always sort of been yeah, you're cool, but I'm not into you like that. And we've just sort of moved on from that point. And that's kind of the healthy way of doing things. Instead of, sitting there obsessing over the shit, just getting out into the open, saying, this is what I feel. If it's not reciprocated, then you just say, okay, well, how do we make this friendship work with these feelings? And typically, if you, communicate well with the other person, none of the problems really occur. Like I said, one of those instances that it happened, they're still one of my best friends, one of the people that I talk with and do stuff the most with. But, as you can probably tell by my rushed and frantic voice and all the times I'm sort of stuttering and trying to get words out, is I've realized that those two aspects of me, the obsessive, the manic, the crazy wanna do shit and get it solved fast side of me, and the depressed and morose and just can't really feel like anything's gonna go right for me regardless of how much optimism I want to have about a situation. Those two sides of me are in constant conflict and are a large reason for why I just don't do the things that I want to do all the times that I want to do them. This channel was something that many times throughout the past I've basically been like, I want to do X, Y, Z. And I would do part of X and, plan for part Y, but never get around to doing it. Or I would do all of X, be very proud of that, and call it a day instead of doing Y and Z. Or I'd skip straight to Z, really hate myself for doing that and want to go back to XY, never go back to XY, and so Z doesn't even get released. Stuff like that. And that extends past just my YouTube career and past my not career, but my YouTube passion, my YouTube hobby, my YouTube channel. It's stuff that happens on the daily. And the reason why I'm currently, in my 4th year of college and still haven't quite gotten to a point where I can consider myself to be like a junior, roughly. I think I'm still in that sophomore section, which doesn't really mean a whole lot in the end. I'm going to eventually graduate as long as I just keep working at it. But the fact that that's there is like, this is part of why you can't do this. You've got that depressed state of you that's like, okay, well now I'm not going to go to class, I'm not going to turn in the homework, I'm not going to X, Y, Z, whatever it is. And then you got the other side of you that's like, I'm really hyper, I'm really excited, and with all this energy and all this motivation to do new things, I want to put it in places that aren't school. So I'd be putting it in places like the YouTube channel. That's one of the reasons, not necessarily the only, but one of the reasons why I sort of fell behind during my senior year of high school. Was because I was spending too much time playing video games and trying to do what I called quote-unquote research on how to do a YouTube channel. It was mainly me just watching YouTube stuff, because why not? I really enjoyed it. Or more recently, I've been taking on a lot of different tasks in different areas, and I sort of need to like step back for myself and the current mindset that I'm in and be like, whoa, recognize these issues that you've seen in the past from reading and watching other things that you've done, and just being like, okay, we can't be doing that again. And as great as that is, like on the surface level of like, well, okay, now I've established where the problem is. I now know, okay, these are things that I shouldn't be doing. How does one go about and actually like fulfill that? And I think that's what the Mike-ochondriac podcast today is going to be talking about. I've kind of wanted to get this out into the open for a while, but never really knew how to do it. And I didn't really want to give names of different people that I was like pining after so that I could like talk about that portion of it. I never really wanted, or didn't really want to give like different scenarios that I'm currently going through that I'm like, okay, well, how do I solve these things? It's more so just an overall, like, I want to talk about the problems that I have, and I want to give maybe some, bounce off the wall ways that I can stop doing those things that have been negatively affecting me, and take some of the negatives and turn them into positives. So to begin with that sort of process, we have to look at what kind of things it is that bother me most about whatever it is. So the first issue I wanted to look at, and pretty much all of the Mike-ochondriac podcasts show this, is I'll have an intense drive and motivation to do something and just talk about it for hours, but not use those hours to actually do it. And in my recent exploration of music and trying to get new artists and groups to listen to, I stumbled across a guy called Aesop Rock. He is the rapper who is known to have the largest vocabulary in all of his song discography. And the reason why he is that way is because he constantly is using words like magpie and cuneiform. Words that are typically not used in everyday language, but he finds ways to put them into the song so that it makes sense. Instead of talking about when he has some grievance about the 9-to-5 day, instead of just being like, I hate my job, my boss is a slob, yeah, I wanted to just make all this money, but I can't because it all goes to my honeys, that kind of shit. Instead of doing that, he finds ways to make those words that obviously are what he wants to express. I mean, it's not necessarily anything wrong with expressing that. And instead uses words that are a bit more highfalutin, a bit more extra, if you will. And that typically has been something that I've looked at and been like, okay, that's something I can relate to. However, in the process of listening to him and trying to decipher half of this shit that he's putting out there, as great as it is, flow-wise, as great as it is, wow, that's really skilled technically, it didn't really help me much. And then I stumbled upon a song that he did called No Regrets. And it sort of put this concept that I've been trying to more or less figure out on my own into much more easy terms. And that's one of the cool things about Aesop. He has these weird, out of nowhere, why is he using these types of words songs. But he also has songs that are just damn, that really hits you deep. And it's weird how that search for knowledge and search for ways of being overly smart, I guess, ended up leading to just a very simplistic oh, this is the obvious answer. So again, the issue that I had been worrying about was like I constantly spent time talking about stuff and not actually doing that stuff. And what he has as his like sort of response to people that are like that in this song No Regrets is, you can dream a little dream or you can live a little dream. I'd rather live it, because dreamers always dream but never get it. And this is talking about a character in his song named Lucy, who constantly is doing the things that she's dreaming about. So that by the time she gets to her deathbed, she looks around at all the shit she's done. She's like, I lived a good life. And that is the kind of stuff that I want to get around to doing. It's the kind of stuff that I need to start actually like actively like working on. Actualizing is the term that I was looking for. And so, the Mike-ochondriac podcast is good for that kind of thing, because it allows me to do my speaking while also doing the things that I want to do. I want to make YouTube videos. I want to, write a bunch of different letters to Congress people to let them know, hey, these things that you're doing are wrong, and I'd rather you not do those things. Those are the kinds of things that are important to me in certain ways and in some more important ways than others. With my career path basically going down that political aisle, it's becoming ever more increasingly difficult to talk about the shit that's on my mind, because I don't want to be a channel that plays video games and talks about politics. I want to be just a channel that plays video games and has fun with it. The politics stuff, if I ever do decide to do like the news channel that I had once upon a time dreamed of doing, that would be just its own thing. I would want it to be, separate from all the video game stuff, because I don't want to bring different crowds together that might not necessarily agree on things. And more importantly, this channel is a connection to the Game Squad, and I don't want to bring politics and all of this like really charged dialogue to the comment section. Should eventually we work on like bringing up the audience numbers and then getting a lot more people talking, because as soon as people start talking and they watch my stuff, they're like, well, he talks about politics sometimes, I don't really agree with him, or I want to talk about politics in the comment section. That's not what I want to bring. So these kinds of videos have been difficult, and it's been all of those things. My current interests are completely different from what they used to be and are now a bit more difficult to talk about. The things that I also used to talk about are things that I really don't feel like I should talk about. And just talking about things that I want to do and not actually doing them is something that also just didn't really appeal to me. And I'm hoping that through this process of getting all of my thoughts and shit down onto some sort of format, I can listen back to it and be like, okay, I understand that you're rambling. I understand that you're sort of just going on these tangents and stuff. But I finally see what you mean when you think X, Y, Z, whatever. So yeah, that's basically that. Some other things that have really been bothering me lately are that I have a lot of different ideas for stories and for games and for music and all kinds of stuff. And I've been working on one particular project in particular. And I find often that when I do all of that, obsessing over things, thinking things way too much, thinking about it before actually doing it, and not doing things because I'm thinking so much that I get out of that phase of being determined to do stuff. It's typically when I focus too much on one item. I burn myself out. I burn myself out to the point where none of my things are done well. And I've noticed this since probably, 2017, 2018. Because I had that period of time after high school where I was just like still unable to do the things that I wanted to do because I just didn't have the motivation or the drive, or when I did have the motivation and the drive, I was like, I just want to do this like really fun stuff, you know, watching YouTube videos, playing with my friends, and not actually trying to be proactive in the things that I find more important. My writing, getting back into learning music is something that I've been wanting to do for fucking ever and haven't done. Now it's, you know, preparing myself for my potential career within politics, be it as somebody who runs for an office or somebody who just works behind the scenes, or somebody who works behind the scenes and eventually is called to office because the people like him so much when he talks with them. That kind of shit. All of my gaming stuff that I want to do, either with Game Squad or with this channel, the Jackhammer 13. All of the new stuff that I wanted to do with one of my other channels that I'm not going to name now because I don't even know if it's going to exist ever. And again, it's one of those other connections that you're just like, I don't really need to have, I don't really want to have, like tying down this outlet of fun. And so, like, having all of these different thoughts bobbling around in my mind, it's probably really just confusing me talking about it and not really going too in depth with it. And that's what I'm trying to, like, interpret with you, because that's how it is for me too. It's always been, I've had this surface idea of like, this is what I want to do, this is how I feel about this is how like things should work or whatever. But it's never been something that I've had like an easy way of explaining or an easy way of saying like, let's do this, you know, that kind of stuff. And this constant stream of thought is something that I go through all the time, 24/7, like literally every single day. I have these kinds of just, I really want to date this girl, I really want to date this girl, I really want to date this girl, I should probably write this thing, 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 I gotta go do this one thing for this one class, I gotta do this one thing for this other class, I gotta do this one thing to help myself, like, propel myself into the world of whatever the fuck. And all of these things are happening, like, in the span of 10 seconds, and I'm just like, dude, I can't, what? And a lot of the time, because of this, I'll have this really deep conversation with myself that goes something along the lines of this. You're a failure. You have constantly let people down because you do not do the things that you set out to do. You'll lie to people a lot of the time. You say you're going to do something and then you don't do it. When people ask you how you're doing, you lie to them and say things like, oh, I'm doing all right, when they could actually really help you. When you have problems that you should probably go to people with, you shut yourself off. And these are the reasons why you're never going to succeed in life. Well, you know, another thing is just like, I just have a lot of stuff that I want to do, and it's just difficult for me to, you know, visualize that and put it together. And, you know, I understand. It's just like, the reason why that's happening is because you are just innately a bad person. I don't think that's necessarily true. I think that I do good things for other people, and no, that's not what I mean by saying you're innately a bad person. I mean, like, you innately have lost the ability to do good. You have lost the ability to go to heaven or some shit like that. You just can't do it. I don't know what you mean. Like, it's just, that doesn't sound right. That doesn't sound like the kind of stuff that I want to believe, you know, and it doesn't sound like the stuff that's actually true for who I am. And it just goes on and on and on with just little dumb shit like that happening at the same time that a lot of really big life shit's happening, you know. I have a class where I have to turn in a paper, and those conversations are happening in my head while I'm doing all of this work, and it's been really difficult for me. Something that I've had to sort of come to grips with is that because of this, my ability to understand Spanish has been lessened. My ability to read and write Spanish was lessened this semester. And it hurt a lot because Spanish is something that, language in general, is something that I just absolutely adore. Linguistics is something that, to me, is just such a key part of all of the things that I hold near and dear. The reason why I made a YouTube channel is because it's something that, like, I felt would be a way to get my voice out there, a way to let people hear who I am as a person. And of course, as I mentioned in the very beginning of the channel, and as I will always bring up later on down the line, I also kind of thought that I could hit the bubble at just the right point in time where, for whatever reason, my channel, as shoddily made as it was, and as pretty, at the time that it was made, itemized around, like, basically just wrestling stuff. Like, despite all of that, I was like, nah, I'm gonna hit it big. I'm gonna get, like, tens of thousands of subscribers, like, within the first 2 months. And then after that, the sky's the fucking limit. I'm gonna be as big as PewDiePie. Well, actually, like, at the time that I started thinking about that, I wasn't thinking about PewDiePie. When I started making videos, sure, but when I started thinking about it, it wasn't that. But you get my drift. And still to this day, that is one of those, like, underlying behind the scenes things that I'm just sort of like, eventually there's gonna be this one thing, this one video that's gonna pop me into the history books of YouTube. And from there on out, I can just do the things that I want to do. And I can just have fun with it, and people will watch, and it will be okay. And that's not how things work, you know. It's just not how it goes. You gotta put in effort. You gotta, be a bit more proactive and talk with people. You gotta be much better at managing the community. That's always something I've never been super great with. I've done better with it at certain instances, but it's still one of my weaknesses. And even, like, more important than all of that, it's not something that's necessarily my number one goal anymore. You know, it used to be one of those things that, like, I thought about all the frickin' time. I had sort of like an obsession with it. I was like, this is what I'm gonna do for the rest of my life. And that might have been a brief period in time when that happened. I think pretty much anybody that's on YouTube has had that sort of intense desire to make it your career or whatever. And if you say you haven't, it's either because you are just a genuinely good person who makes videos for the shit of it, or it's because you're lying. You know, there's not a whole lot of in between there. But yeah, I just sort of forgot the train of thought that I was going on with all that. In general, when life has gotten me down, I've taken the most drastic of measures. You know, shutting myself into my room and just sort of sleeping the days away has been pretty much the most recent of things. Before that, there was multiple attempts at my life. None of them successful, thankfully. But things that, like, I really shouldn't have been doing. You know, it's stuff that if I had just talked about it, if I had just communicated with people, if I had stopped overthinking things, if I stopped obsessing over things, would not have gone to the lengths that they did. And that, I think, is part of that manicness, you know, that weird, both helpful in that, like, it got me to do, pretty much the start of my channel was because of that manic phase, where I was just like, I'm going to record like 30 videos in the next 2 days, and I'm just going to post them all. And I did basically exactly that. The majority of the SmackDown Shut Your Mouth series came from me just in one day being like, yo, I'm going to record a bunch of this shit, and then I'm going to post it, like, immediately. Not a lot of foresight went into that. I also didn't have the best materials at the time to doing it, but that really didn't matter in the end. I was having fun with it. But, like, that's the cool side of it. That's the awesome side of it. And that's the side that I want to use more and tap into. But as I was saying, like, the other side of it is just anytime that something bad goes wrong, if I'm not in a depressed state where, it's me being lethargic and just not moving, or if it's me not being like able to feel things, which thankfully hasn't happened in a long time, and I'll explain all that in a few minutes as well. But if it's not been that, it's been this overly obsessed part. And it just so happens that the majority of the time, that's been when I've been wanting to like expand a relationship that I'm in. Be it a friendship that I want to turn into something more, be it a current relationship that I'm in that I feel like is not as smooth as it used to be, or just be it, my connection to a certain project or idea, and me like going so far that I burn myself out with it and don't ever get to finish it. I've got a story that was basically about Olivia and I's friendship, Olivia from the Game Squad's friendship with me, and like how that turned into this weird amalgamation of crazy shit that happens in sort of like a partially biographic, partially fictional novel. I worked on that and had an entire chapter basically done. But I kept like overanalyzing that chapter and kept looking at that chapter to the point where I just got burnt out and it was like, I don't want to do this anymore. I still want to do it, but like I don't want to do it, if that makes sense. It's one of those like, you still have the desire to eventually get that project done, but in that moment in time, you do not want to be working on it. And like that's, again, not necessarily like the worst of it. The worst of it comes from me obsessing over people. And how that has negatively affected my ability to, do a lot of things. So let's go into then the other side of it. I've sort of belabored the point on manicness that I have, and I've sort of belabored the point on like that obsession. And I think it's because I'm currently in one of those states where I'm just like wanting to focus so much on one thing and explain it to the best of my ability. And when I am still explaining it, I'm like, I want to say this, I want to say this, I want to say this. And I don't ever really get to say those things that I think I want to say because I'm just focusing on the one point like I'm doing right now. So you get my gist. The other end of it was the depression, the feelings of nothingness. And that kind of stuff didn't really happen until 2015, until I was away at college. This is kind of like getting into a my life story territory here, where I'm telling a story about my life instead of just complaining. But bear with me at least. In my sophomore year of high school, roughly around 2013, I started having these like really weird negative thoughts. Before that point, when I was around 12, so that would have been around like 2011, I had things like that as well, but typically it was nothing that a little bit of Eminem or Linkin Park didn't solve. It wasn't something that I couldn't just like throw on some music and be like, okay, I'm chill now. Couldn't solve. But in 2013, when in the sophomore year, things were a bit more complicated than that. It wasn't just so much of like a I'm not really enjoying life kind of thing, and it was more of a really dark kind of thoughts, like seeing somebody on the bus on the way to school and being like having these aggressive thoughts towards them. Not always about like harming them or being like a murderer and trying to kill them kind of thoughts, but more along the lines of just like, fuck that dude, they did something that I'm not particularly happy with, so fuck them. And that was something I never really was. I was never an angry person. So that part alone was terrifying. But then, of course, it went worse. It got to, I really want to harm that person. And then it got to, I I really want to murder that person. And it was never necessarily a way of me saying, like, okay, I have these innate desires to kill. It was more along the lines of just, like, I don't really want to say poetic, because that just sort of sounds dumb, but like a poetic version of murder. You know, a storyline being constructed around reality to, I don't know, shield the actual, like, pain and shit that I was feeling. So instead of, you know, acting on those kinds of things, because I knew that those things didn't, like, reflect who I was, and instead of, you know, voicing those things, because it's kind of difficult to voice that you had thoughts of wanting to kill somebody without people think of you as psycho, as weird, as being somebody that's not to be trusted with society, like within society. Instead of doing that, all that, I just sort of kept it in. And 2013 came and went, and I mentioned it once or twice to the person that it was mainly directed at, and he, like, sort of was like, oh, that's weird as fuck, but okay. And we talked it out, and things were okay on that front. But those, like, thoughts and feelings and stuff, while they didn't really necessarily come back for a long time, were still something that existed there. And it was just really weird, you know? So then flash forward to my first year at Dickinson College, when I was, you know, a freshman in high school, freshman in college, rather, bleh. And I say around the same time as the 2048 video that I made, where I had the lowest possible score of getting a 0. Around that time, actually a little bit before then, because that was when I was in my singles room, another story entirely. But around that time, I started having these feelings recur, and it was more directed towards people that were, like, directly around me, namely my roommate. And that bothered me to the point that I legitimately didn't want to be in that room with him, because I was afraid something bad was going to happen. Not because I would do anything, but because I would just, like, black out and wake up, like, in the next morning covered in, like, a shit ton of blood and see my roommate dead on the floor. You know? And again, these aren't thoughts that, like, I actively was like, I'm going to do this and it's going to be great, fuck yeah. These are thoughts of, like, genuinely terrifying to me at that point in time and later on. And I'm like, why do I think this way? Why is this happening? And so again, that would be, like, leading into my obsessiveness, the desire to try and fix the problem. But while all this is happening, I start noticing that enjoyment of life has just slowly been creeping away. General feelings of, like, happiness, sadness, not necessarily anger. Anger was still always kind of there. But, you know, typical emotions that human beings feel were lessening. The reaction that I get from something that made me happy was much more forced, and it was something that I knew I, like, actually enjoyed, and I knew made me feel happy or good or made me want to laugh and stuff, but I didn't know how to express that emotion anymore, in a sense, and so it just sort of felt fake to me, and it felt unreal. And again, I didn't talk about this because I obsessed over it in my own mind and started trying to figure out how to do it my own way. And this especially happened with that girl that I mentioned in the Mike-ochondriac podcast. Not long after the second Mike-ochondriac podcast video, she ended up not being able to talk with me for a long time. Her computer was confiscated for other reasons. And because of that, I just sort of dwelt on it too long. And that just sort of became a common theme. Something bad would happen that isn't necessarily the end of the world, but it is, like, a big enough deal that, you know, if you feel emotionally drained or emotionally, like, it just affects you, like, really badly. And instead of, you know, like most people do, you know, you take the moment to be like, okay, well, this fucking sucks, and you grieve over it, and then, like, a couple weeks later, you're like, okay, we're moving on in life, for however long it takes people. I would just keep thinking about it and be like, where did I go wrong? What did I do right? What can I do again to like fix the situation? Yada yada yada, on and on and on. And that led into the draining, the emotional, or more so lack of emotion, that led to my first suicide attempt. It was really fucking crazy too, because like to that point I had been more or less experimenting with the ways to find pain or ways to find pleasure again. At this point I had like a hoodie string that I used oftentimes to choke myself and feel something. And the thought from that eventually led to, with the first attempt, trying to choke myself out with a belt. Now, part of me at the time knew, regardless of what I did then, that it wouldn't kill me. It would be one of those things where, like, I would choke myself to the point where I pass out, and then at that point, my grip would loosen on it, and everything would go black, and I wouldn't necessarily die. I was foolish enough at points to think, oh, this is actually going to kill me, and I kind of wanted it to. But I think a lot of it was just like, I didn't know how to express these kinds of emotions and feelings that I was having, and I just wanted somebody to find me in that position and just be like, oh fuck, this dude's in pain, he needs help. And it just never really happened. I always did it in places that were not like secluded. I did it in places where people could see me, but no one ever really did. And that kind of sucked. And eventually it got to the point where there were 2 or 3 of those types of things, like, that got to, like, a habit of sorts, and still no one noticed it. So I got pissed. And I was like, fuck this. Obviously this isn't working. I know what will electrocution. So I took my key that I had for the room and I tried to put it in an electric socket and found out that the key was too big to fit in that socket. That was the moment when I realized, oh shit, what the fuck am I doing with my life right now? These are things that I had been for, at that point, 17 years trying to avoid. Well, not necessarily 17 years, because there's periods of time when I didn't even know that existed. But you get what I'm saying. Like, for the majority or all of my life, I didn't want to be doing those kinds of things. And so I see myself in this position where I am in such a bad state of mind that I had this comical idea to put this fucking key that doesn't even fit into an electric outlet to end the pain. And that wasn't the end of that story. That was just the beginning of the end. That was me realizing, okay, well, now we need to do something about this. There were multiple attempts after it, very much along the same lines of trying to choke myself out, and very much along the same lines of having somebody just fucking take care of me. Another problem that I have, where I want to have somebody take care of me so that I don't have to fucking do it. I've gotten much better with that recently. I feel very proud that that's happened as well, but it's something that really bothered me. And all of this culminated to a point where I was just like, all right, time to get into therapy. So I get into therapy and ended up taking medications and stuff. And this shit worked like a charm. I cannot tell you how fast it worked either. It was like literally a couple weeks after I started getting on the medication, I felt normal again. Like, it felt like I was back to who I was supposed to be. Now, with that, I have just an innate laziness. I don't want to do shit most of the time. And I think part of it was because, like, I was pushing myself still after, like, going through all of this. So, like, I had to, in order to get back to Dickinson College, I had to take a few classes. That went pretty well, passed the classes. I sort of slacked off with it because I felt like, well, it's community college, I'm smarter than this, I don't have to fucking do it. And that's not necessarily like the best way to think about that. Community college is great. I learned a lot from those classes, more so than I even realized at the time. But I had that kind of mentality, of just like, well, fuck it, I'm not gonna worry about it. And then I go back, I start noticing, even while on the medication, mind you, these same problems like coming up, and I was like, well, what the fuck's the cause of it then? If it's not, a chemical imbalance, because that's being treated, that's being taken care of, or at least it should be. And I realized that it was because, regardless of the natural biological portion of it, there's also a social portion of it. The ability to like look at your surroundings and say, okay, if I have a problem, I can go this place and solve it, or this place and solve it, or this place and solve it. Or I can go to any number of places and maybe not necessarily solve the problem, but at least get an idea of what to do to solve the problem. I didn't have that up in Dickinson, and it really sucks because Dickinson College is honestly where I feel like I was most at home, university-wise. Not to say that where I'm going right now is not fun. I've been enjoying it for the most part, but it's not the same feeling. Flash forward to a few years after that. I've been doing really well. I recognized my issues. I found ways to cope with them, and I was like, you know what? I don't want to get on the medication anymore. I don't like this shit. I hate medication. To this day, I freaking hate medication. Part of it's due to my familial history of substance abuse, be it alcohol, cigarettes with nicotine, or drugs. All three of which were something that my parents were very much into. Two of those things, because I don't necessarily think that nicotine and cigarettes really affected him, but two of those things led to, in part, my father's inevitable downfall, and I didn't want to be like that. That's one of the reasons why when I found out that, oh shit, this is actually what's fucking happening, in my mind, like, sort of clicked two and two together of, like, you doing these, like, attempts. Are you trying to, like, you're doing the thing that you said you wouldn't do. It's part of, like, that mentality of, like, I just don't want to take medications, be it, painkillers. Anytime that I have some sort of, like, major thing where I should probably take painkillers, be it, like, a massive migraine, which I've had one or two of in my life. I've had massive headaches, and then there's the difference between that and migraines, which are, like, fucking debilitating. I hated that. That was absolute trash. Or like right after I got my wisdom teeth taken out, typically they tell you to stay on medications. I was like, fuck that. I'm going to do it for one day and I feel better now. Fuck it. Like, my teeth hurt, sure, but not enough to like make me want to take medications. I'm not going to deal with that. Stuff like that, I don't drink coffee because I don't want to be addicted to caffeine. So all of those kinds of things led to me being like, all right, well, the medication I'm on, as much as it's working for me, I've got this shit. I don't need the Prozac. I don't need the Wellbutrin. I don't need to, like, have those things dictate my life. And it worked for, like, 4 months. I didn't notice any difference for those 4 months of, like, me being on the medication and off of it. So I was like, okay, this is cool. And then it started coming back. Not in the same way, though. That's the whole thing with depression that I've noticed, or any form of mental illness. I could have, for all I know, since I bring up depression and manicness, I could have bipolar. It's something that I don't really know. I was diagnosed with the major depressive disorder, but I could be diagnosed with bipolar the next time around. Who fucking knows? The brain's a weird thing. And so, like, with all that information that I had, I think I should have seen it coming that it would come back. I think I should have seen that coming a little bit. And again, it didn't come back in the same way. It wasn't as aggressively like me wanting to kill myself. It was more of like when I'm driving at night, I'm like, I'm going to start doing things that are a bit more risky, and if I die, I die. That kind of stuff. And it's also hard to talk about these kinds of like small minor things, or not necessarily minor things, you know what I mean though. Like, it's not like you know directly up front, this is me wanting to be suicidal, and this is what we need to do to curb that kind of behavior. It was more of like, this is me doing things that aren't necessarily suicidal, but are, weirdly in the same realm, because it's dangerous. And then the lethargy came back, the whole feeling of like not being able to do anything. I'd fall asleep around like a typically normal hour, 12 o'clock for a college student. 12 a.m. rather, is a good time typically to go to sleep. And I'd wake up to my alarm clock around like 8 o'clock. I had a class at 9:30, and I'd say, fuck it, turn off that shit and go back to sleep. I would have a class at 12 p.m., something that I should easily get to. And I'm like, fuck it, go back to sleep. And it wasn't necessarily because, like, I wanted to skip those classes. It wasn't because I was being lazy and didn't want to go to those classes. But in my mind, because that's the kind of person that I am, I kind of figured that's what it was. So for the longest time, I was just like, well, I just need to start getting better at it, not doing those things. And then it got to the point where I was like, okay, I'm going to get up. I'm going to get up. I'm going to get up. And I end up falling asleep, and I wake up, and I'm like, fuck, I was going to get up. Why didn't I get up? What happened? Why didn't I get out of bed? Why did I, drift off to sleep again? And I started worrying about it a bit more, but I was like, no, it's, again, me just not putting on the effort to do these things. It's just me not addressing, like, this obvious problem of procrastination, or this obvious problem of laziness, or this obvious problem of, like, not getting out of bed when you're supposed to get out of bed. And then I realized one day that I got out of bed. I did all the things I was supposed to do, and then after, like, looking at the day, I was just like, fuck this, I don't want to do it, and got right back in bed. And it wasn't just a fuck this, I don't want to do it laziness. It was a fuck this, I don't want to do it depression. And I realized I was like, okay, it's because I'm not on the medication. That's what's happening here. Recently, I've been taking efforts to get back into therapy, get back into, like, taking medications. And I've been really proud of it. I've been really happy for doing that. It's one of the ways that I've been taking this, like, manic state of, like, really pent up energy and just putting it to some good use. And something I want to do more of. But in the time it's taken from when all of this shit began till now, I've really just sort of let a lot of things slide that I shouldn't have let slide. I've stopped doing a lot of things that I really enjoyed doing. And most importantly, all of the things that I've wanted to do have suffered as a result of me not taking care of myself. So today's Mike-ochondriac podcast, at the end of it all, I just sort of wanted to talk about these issues that I was having to relate to you, obviously, why the channel's not been doing what it's doing, why I have not been doing what I would like to do, and to use it as a cautionary tale, as like this is what happened to me, and this is how I'm now changing that. It's not an easy process, and it's not one that has like a set, direct answer. But mental health is important. Mental health is something that we need to look at as individuals when it happens to you, and as a society when it's happening to all the people around you, and say, this is real. This is something that needs to be addressed. This is something that when issues arise, we need to, instead of letting them simmer to the point where eventually they catch fire and just burn everything down, and say, okay, now let's actually turn it down so that it's not simmering as much, because there's no way to turn off the fire of mental illness. It's always going to be there. But we need to deal with it. We need to figure out what it is that helps us, what it is that is not so beneficial, and what it is that we can do to turn the negatives into positives. Hopefully I was able to explain as much as that as I possibly could, as best as I could, while also still doing my typical ranting, raving style of, like, I'm a freaking lunatic, and words are coming out of my mouth that sometimes make sense, sometimes don't. And yeah, I just kind of hope that you guys enjoyed it. I'm going to be doing a little bit more of this kind of presentation style in the future, raw, uncut version of things, sort of like how my brain works and the processes behind it. Because to me, one of the more important things is mental health. One of the more important things to talk about, because I've dealt with it for so long and because it's been such a huge aspect of my life, having having my father have committed suicide. Like, it's just a big thing for me. And I felt that, like, sharing my story in this way was helpful. Not just to me, but to hopefully you guys as well. Thank you very much for watching. My name's the Jack with 13. I will catch you guys in the next thing, or whatever it is that I do, and I am signing out.